Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm Jordan Shapiro from the San Francisco Foundation, where I lead communications for the Partnership for the Bay's Future. Today, we're very fortunate to have public advocates as our co-host. And today's webinar is on the Housing Readiness Report, which is an equity-centered tool that tracks how Bay Area jurisdictions are following through on their housing commitments, and it helps you turn that data into action. So just a couple of things to note before we jump in. This event is being recorded and we'll be sharing it afterwards. If you'd like to be notified when that recording is available or want to stay up to date on PBF events, news, resources, please sign up for our email list at baysfuture.org. I'm going to go ahead and put that link in the chat. Also, we'll have time at the end of the event for Q&A. Please submit your questions using the Q&A box, not the chat. We just want to make sure we catch all your questions. Now I'd like to do a quick round of introductions. As I mentioned, I'm with the San Francisco Foundation. I head up communications for Partnership for the Bay's Future. My focus is supporting jurisdictions and community-based organizations to co-develop and implement equitable community-informed housing policies. I also lead work on the Housing Readiness Report, the reason we're all here today, as well as developing other resources and tools and convenings to help housing stakeholders align strategies, share knowledge, and push for systemic change across the region. I also have the pleasure of introducing Skylar Spear, staff attorney with Public Advocates, where they support state and local campaigns for housing justice. Their work is varied, but has included tracking and supporting housing element implementation, in part by supporting the creation of the database that you'll be seeing today in our webinar. It's a part of the Housing Readiness Report. And they would like to talk about they would love to talk about how to help local community members be more integrated in their cities, housing decisions, how to support true reinvestment without displacement, or their dog. Unfortunately, Skylar didn't share a picture of their dog with me. See if we can persuade them later to share that. I would really like to emphasize that the housing element database that you'll see in a little bit would not exist without Skylar and Public Advocates. Their expertise and persistence help turn complicated sets of local plans into something usable, searchable, and actionable for the rest of us. It's truly the backbone of this latest version of the Housing Readiness Report. So before I dive into the tool, I'd like to give a quick grounding in what the Housing Readiness Report is and how it came to be. The Housing Readiness Report launched in 2022 to answer the question, are Bay Area jurisdictions following through on their housing commitments? At the time, jurisdictions were drafting their housing elements, and the public comment window was the most important opportunity for community input. So early versions of the Housing Readiness Report, it focused on tracking where jurisdictions were in the housing element process and make it easy for people to get involved. Alongside that, we organized key context, such as community conditions, RHNA goals, and housing policies, so that stakeholders could really see the big picture all in one place. And from the very beginning, equity has been at the heart of the Housing Readiness Report. We knew that tracking numbers alone wasn't enough, so we needed to shine a light on who was most impacted by the housing crisis. That's why we included community conditions like rent burden, displacement risk, and demographic shifts, so that equity could be the lens through which all other data is understood. Crucially, the Housing Readiness Report was shaped through workshops and feedback across the housing ecosystem, including advocates and community-based organizations, city and county staff, regional and state partners, and funders, so that the tool could really serve both policy work and on-the-ground advocacy. Fast forward to today, most jurisdictions have certified housing elements, and the work has shifted from planning to implementation. And that's why you'll now see a housing element database that lets you compare commitments across jurisdictions and clearer ways to track progress over time. So now I'm going to share my screen and walk us through the tool. Skylar, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see my screen okay? Awesome. Thank you. So when you get to the landing page of the Housing Readiness Report, you're going to find three main options here. One, you can find your city, which gives you all 109 jurisdictions in the Bay Area. You can compare housing programs, and that will take you to the Housing Elements database, or you can explore ways to take action. On this homepage, you can scroll through the full list of every Bay Area jurisdiction or use the search bar at the top to quickly find a city or county, such as Oakland. Each row gives you a snapshot of how a city is doing. The first two columns show the percentage of low and very low income housing that jurisdictions have permitted towards their state mandated housing goals. Those are known as the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. There's a toggle towards the top that actually shows you the number of units. So you can see here in Alameda, they've permitted 138 units, and their goal is 421 units according to their RHNA goals. The next column shows the number of programs a jurisdiction has committed to adopt in its housing element to affirmatively further fair housing. And then the last column shows the share of households who are rent burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs. You'll also notice some symbols next to the cities that give a little bit of context. A green check mark means the jurisdiction has a certified housing element. An orange check mark exclamation point means it has not had its housing element certified. And then if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see some of these little blue houses, and those indicate designated pro-housing by the HCD, making it eligible for certain incentives. You can sort these columns to compare across jurisdictions, for instance, very low income housing permitted, or you can select multiple jurisdictions to see them side by side. And there's a little select button here. And so you can see those three cities. Next, we're going to explore jurisdictions page. We're going to go to Oakland simply because that's where I live. So when you get on the city's landing page, you'll get to an overview of that city where you get a snapshot of data available for that jurisdiction. You can quickly see the city's housing commitments, reported progress towards its RHNA goals, and community conditions. And if you want to dig into any of these, you can click on the left-hand side. There are tabs for each of these. So first, we're going to take a look at the Housing Plans tab. Every city and county in California is required by state law to adopt a housing element, which is the plan for how they'll meet their share of housing needs at all income levels on an 8-year cycle. These plans spell out both policy commitments and sites for potential housing development. Towards the top of the page, you'll see whether a jurisdiction's housing element has been certified by the state. And then below that, you can download the city's full housing element directly. You'll also see a quick summary of the number of programs a jurisdiction has committed to adopt, explicitly designed to affirmatively further fair housing. That's an important marker of whether jurisdictions are taking steps to address patterns of segregation and expand access to opportunity. Then here at the bottom, you get to the exciting part. It's the housing element database itself. This one is specific to Oakland because you're on Oakland's page. There is a full database of all jurisdictions. So here you can dive into the actual program commitments for this city. I won't go into detail into this because Skylar's going to do a deep dive into this in a few minutes. This page really connects the dots between planning and accountability. You can see a city's official plan, whether it was certified, and then compare the promises made against what we're seeing on the ground. With that, let's next explore the reported progress tab. First up is the annual progress report, which cities have to submit to HCD by April 1st each year. These reports show how a jurisdiction is implementing their housing element, what's moved from a plan into an action. HCD publishes these yearly, and you can access them on their sites, which we have links to. And we're currently exploring the best ways to make each jurisdiction's APR accessible directly from the Housing Readiness Report. So hopefully we'll have updates on that in the coming months. Below that, you will see permitting progress towards the RHNA goals. This chart shows permits issued as a share of each income level target for the sixth cycle. You can also toggle between the fifth and sixth cycles, so you can see the last cycle's RHNA goals. And if you hover over it, you can see the actual numbers of permits towards their goals. This makes it easy to see where production is happening and where it's lagging, especially for low and very low income. Let's move on to the community conditions tab. And then we'll look at, when we look at housing, it's not just about the permits or plans, it's also about the conditions people are living in. These indicators give us a way to understand who's most affected by the housing crisis and how inequities show up across different cities. The first indicator that you're going to see is rent burden. This shows the share of households paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And when you look at this data by race and ethnicity, the disparities are clear. Black and Latino households are much more likely to be rent burdened. And that tells us that housing instability doesn't affect everyone equally. It's concentrated among communities who have historically been excluded from wealth and housing access. Next up, we have gentrification risk. This tracks whether neighborhoods are stable, at risk of gentrification, already gentrifying, or exclusive communities. For low-income households, particularly households of color, this data shows who is most likely to be pushed out as housing costs rise. It gives us an early warning sign of displacement and helps advocates and policymakers intervene before it's too late. And then finally on this page, we have neighborhood opportunity. And this looks at what kinds of resources are available in neighborhoods and where people live. I'm sorry, what resources are available in the neighborhoods where people live. It ranges from high poverty and segregation up through moderate, high, and highest resources levels. Here again, the racial disparities stand out. Communities of color are much more likely to be concentrated in lower resource neighborhoods. This reflects the legacy of redlining and exclusionary zoning, and it shows how much work remains to undo those patterns. This data shows not just the scale of the housing crisis, but also who's carrying the greatest burden. It makes it abundantly clear why implementation of housing plans has to prioritize equity, not just raw numbers. Finally, on a city's page, we have the Get Involved section, which is really about turning information into action. And what you'll notice right away is that the page is split into two audiences, one for community advocates and one for government staff. That way, each group sees examples and resources that are most relevant to their role. For example, under the advocate side, a 5-minute action might be something simple like spreading word on social media. With a little more time, you could explore toolkits like Shift the Bay or California Dream to strengthen local advocacy. And if you've got a day or more, you'll find guidance for attending a city council meeting or digging into your city's housing element itself. If we go to the government staff side, the same time-based structure applies, but the resources look a little different. Quick actions include sharing the tool within your networks, while bigger time commitments point to things like case studies from other jurisdictions or toolkits for public engagement. So I really hope this gives you a sense of the Housing Readiness Report. But the most significant addition to the latest version of this tool is the Housing Element Database. And that's where I want to pause and hand things over to Skylar. So I will stop sharing my screen. And Skylar, take it away.
Hello. Hold on. Let me share my screen, which is going to be the same screen that Jordan just stopped sharing, but I have control. Is that working? Yes. Great. Hi everybody. I am very excited to be showing this database to you all. The real secret of this database is that I just hired some people to make the thing that I wished that I had. My job has involved a lot of going through housing elements, and it turns out it's really annoying to go through housing elements and find all of their programs in the like raw documents. And so I just constantly was like, what if this were all collected in a nice location? And then found some money that allowed me to hire some people to help me do that. And then had a lot of conversations with a lot of other people about what information would be most useful. And this is what we ended up with, is this database that I genuinely really like to work with and like how it's organized. So I am gonna explain kind of what information is in here and then show you kind of how you can use it. So the basic information that's in the database is all of the program commitments in almost all of the housing elements in the Bay Area. We're missing a few. I honestly forget the exact number that we do have in the database. We're working on getting the rest of the housing elements in there, but it's something around 90 of the Bay Area jurisdictions have all of their programs in this database. We have sorted all of these programs in the following columns. And so we've sorted them by jurisdiction. And so right now, all of the data is all of the programs are grouped by jurisdiction, which you can kind of see. Albany, American Canyon, they're alphabetical right now, Antioch. And then each program we've tagged with the county that the jurisdiction is in, great, normal. The program number or name as listed by the jurisdiction. If the jurisdiction has given the program a title, then we put that in there. Clearly not all of them really have titles. Also, every jurisdiction uses a different numbering method, as you can kind of see as you go through. Here are some more titles. And then the more meaty stuff is kind of over here as we get into the actions, the deliverables, etc. So the actions are usually directly pulled from the housing element text itself. And so you can open it up kind of like I just did. Wait, I can do that again if that's helpful. So you go whichever program you're looking at, Alameda County, nope, City of Alameda program 18. You want to see this full program actions. This just lists the actions that the jurisdiction has committed to in this particular program. City of Alameda's rental rehabilitation program provides financial and technical assistance, et cetera, et cetera. I won't read the whole thing. The actions really vary by jurisdiction. Also, these are not necessarily the quantifiable deliverables that are also required. That was kind of a boring one. None of them are boring. Oh, these are all very short. Some of them get very long. Anyway, the next column is the deliverables, and these are often the things that are kind of easier to track kind of in the APRs, for example. So here, Antioch program 1.1.4 has a deliverable of annually serve 5 extremely and very low income homeowners through provision of at least 5 grants annually of up to $20,000. And so the action for that program is increasing housing and energy security for lower income housing by reducing energy consumption, right? So you can see how the deliverable lines up with the action there. Yeah. After the deliverable, we get the deliverable dates, which is a relatively, straightforward. Wow, I'm bad at scrolling down. Relatively straightforward data point. So the next kind of pieces of information that I am excited about are we have the month and year of kind of checkpoint or deliverable. So for example, Albany's program to develop incentives for affordable family housing, including 3 and 4 bedroom units, has this deliverable, and it says that by 2020, there's gonna be one of the deliverables is due by 2024, end of 2024. the year first checkpoint is 2024. If a jurisdiction has put that it's going to complete a program or part of a program by a month, then we have the month in there, January of 2026, right? And this one is updating a municipal code, which is, yeah, making sure that zoning code is in compliance with state mandated streamlining requirements. It's going to do that by January of 2026, American Canyon. Next, we've also tagged, so every jurisdiction tagged whether each individual program was an AFFH program or not. That is whether it was a program designed to do affirmatively further fair housing or not. And if they did tag it as an AFFH program, they talked about, they like tagged a theme, an AFFH theme, and we put that in the database. I'm going to be very honest that I have less of a concept of how to use these AFFH themes, but I know that they're useful to other people, which is why we've kept them in here. Later, we also tag what we call a policy category, which I have often found to be more helpful than thinking through the AFFH theme. But these are verbatim tags from each jurisdiction about what like category they think their programs fall into. We've also included whether the city has flagged certain funding or resources to help complete the programs. It looks like no cities have. Here we go. So Antioch flagged their funding and resources for all of their, they're not expanding right now, for each of their programs and where the funding is coming from, which I also find to be very helpful. So is Benicia. And then we get into type of action, scale, policy categories, and these were a little bit more, we came up with these basically. So when we were creating this database, we were also trying to figure out how to kind of analyze how the region did overall in terms of developing programs, what the programs were actually accomplishing versus weren't accomplishing, to try to make something a little bit more data-driven than anecdotal, because there was a lot of anecdotal talk about how the sixth cycle went, but we wanted a little bit more data about what was happening during the sixth cycle, housing element sixth cycle. And so we came up with these three, the type of action, scale, and policy categories. And we tagged the type of action in basically three different ways. So if an action was related to finding funding or giving funding to organizations or individuals, then it was a funding action. If it was a policy action, that usually meant that a jurisdiction was committing to adopting a new ordinance, right? Creating a new policy. An action that we tagged as practice was a jurisdiction saying that it was not necessarily going to adopt a new ordinance, but its staff or city council or somebody was going to adopt some sort of practice that would influence housing within the jurisdiction. The scale tags have to do with the geographic region or population that is impacted by the program. So you see that we have citywide. You see that we have group. That means that there's a particular population group that's being targeted by the program. Outreach study monitoring are the programs that are about community education. And so they often are, we're going to publish materials on websites, we're going to hold study sessions, we're going to make sure that landlords have up-to-date information on fair housing laws, kind of those sorts of things. And there are fewer, but they do exist. Area site zone are more geographically limited, and those are usually like specific plans. There are certain neighborhoods that are being targeted by a particular housing element program. Those are also helpful to assess kind of what a city is up to and also what's been happening throughout the region. The policy category tags are the ones that I think can be really helpful to advocates and jurisdictions alike, in terms of finding, both in terms of assessing what's happening around the region, but also in terms of finding allies and resources for certain particularly tricky programs to implement. We have a bunch of policy category tags, and so I can't go through them all. You can kind of see some of them in this list, right? And so we've tagged, for example, this program here, Albany's program, has to do with the development process. This program here is some sort of rezoning program. Rental housing assistance, funding is one of the categories. staff capacity usually would have to do with hiring new staff to make sure that jurisdiction has the capacity to follow through on its programs. There are a lot of them. I will show you how to use them in a second. And then finally, we just tagged whether the programs are AFFH programs or not. Okay, so how do you use all of this? It's with, move these videos around. These little buttons up here, right? And so the fun thing, so right now I said that all of these programs are grouped by jurisdiction. I can click this button and degroup them by jurisdiction and instead decide to group them by type of action. And so now they're grouped. If there is no type of action tagged, they're in this empty spot here. If there are funding action, all of the funding actions are in one big group, never-ending group. Oh, if they're tagged as both funding policy and practice, you see it just kind of, that's how they're grouped. I can degroup them by type of action and group them by policy category type instead. So if I want to see all of the programs that relate to ADUs, I do have to kind of go through and find all of the ADU and other tags, but I can see all of the ADU related programs this way. I can see all of the affordable housing development related programs in this group here. If I want to look at tenant, well, I'm going to degroup these by policy category and go back to jurisdiction. The other fun thing that you can do is if you go up to this button here, filter, this is where you can get a little bit more specific. So here I can filter so that I'm looking only at programs that contain community land trust. That did not show up. Okay, how about CLT? Okay, I assumed there would be something there, and there's not. Oh, you know what it is? It needs to be actions. There you go. So if an action contains CLT, it's now showing up in this thread. So now I can probably actually go and more will show up there. Yeah. So you can see every action, every program that has to do with community land trusts or mentions community land trusts in the actions is showing up here. And so you can compare them. I can say where actions contain community land trust and jurisdiction says, if I only want to look at Concord's, I don't know. Oh, they do have some that have to do with community land trusts. Oh, good. So you can see Concord's programs that have to do with community land trusts, and you can keep you can add an or instead of an and. So this is all of Concord or all community land trust programs. I'm not sure why you would have that particular search in mind, but you can do it. And add condition groups that are kind of sub-conditions. So this creates a condition that and jurisdiction has any of Concord. So if I turn this into an or, so it's at all community land trust related programs in the Bay Area or anything in Concord specifically that condition where actions contain in lieu B. Ooh, that's not how you spell that. Again, kind of a weird grouping, but you know what? I don't know what people are looking for. Right, and you can keep playing around with that and kind of go infinitely there. And then you can decondition all of these if you want. The last thing that you can do is you can download this as a spreadsheet and then you can see it in a print view. And I'm pretty sure that you can do that with filters on. So I'm just going to re-add. Here, I'm going to go policy category, tenant protections. So that's the fun thing that you can do with policy categories is that in the filter you can just add policy categories. But so I'm pretty sure that when you go here, if you hit download CSV, it will only be these all the tenant protections programs that show up, for example. Yeah, that is my initial kind of walkthrough of what the database is, and basic ways that you can use it. But I also know that more questions come up as more people kind of play around with it, or maybe as you've been watching me play around with it, you have specific questions about how to filter or how to group. If you want, you can hide specific fields, so that you don't have to see everything all at once. So if I want to take out AFH theme, that just removes that category from here for now. I'm going to unhide that because I don't know if it only affects me or everybody. Yeah, okay, that's what I have as a starting point, but also I think we are set to just answer questions for a while, and I'm more than happy to answer questions about this database, why we made the decisions we did, what's included in it, how to filter and sort, what you can use it for. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Skylar. Really love this database. It's so useful for so many ways. Um, yeah, and yeah, we'll take questions for every aspect of the housing readiness report. And if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Ella, if you want to come off, I think you've been monitoring the questions. Do you want to come?
Hi, yes. My video for some reason is disabled, so I will
Nice.
ask off video. Apologies, and thank you all for your questions. And please continue to put them in the Q&A box so we can um, answer things live. Um, First, does the report data show risk of gentrification by geography or neighborhood?
It does not show geography by it's just the jurisdiction. It doesn't drill down. It would be, I agree, that would be incredibly helpful and really show where the gentrification risk is really happening. So cities can take more action in specific neighborhoods, but unfortunately, it doesn't drill down that far.
Thank you. And the next question is for communities that are not yet certified, how will the database be updated?
Um, Yeah, for cities. So a lot of, I'll just give a background on all the data on the site. Some of the data is live and reading directly from, like, for instance, the RENA goals are reading directly from HCD's dashboard. And when a city is certified, I can't remember if that is pulling directly from HCD or not. I need to look into that. But either way, we do periodic updates to the site. Um, and when a city is certified, we will change that manually.
Okay. Thank you, Jordan. The next question is, can you say more about what AFFH is and its implications across jurisdictions, what it requires, geographic scale, etc.?
Skylar, I don't know if you want to handle that or if you want me to.
Yeah, I can try. To. It's AFH is intentionally pretty broad. And so I feel like anytime I try to shorten it, I'm always at risk of leaving something out. And so I'm always happy for people to add. But AFH, the concept of affirmatively furthering fair housing at a very basic level, says that cities and counties in California, anytime they take any action related to housing, they're supposed to take into account whether and how to undo and mitigate the ongoing harms of racism and segregation that are historical to how housing has developed over the last all of American history. And so that means, yeah, specifically in the context of housing elements, that means that each action they are supposed to be thinking about kind of the impacts on protected classes in their jurisdiction. And AFH impacts both kind of where jurisdictions are supposed to be thinking about citing housing to be developed and where they're supposed to be thinking about, or how they're supposed to be thinking about how to make sure that lower income housing is equitably distributed, but also kind of how other resources are distributed in a way that's equitable across their jurisdiction. And also jurisdictions are supposed to take into account displacement pressures, for example. Are communities of color being pushed out of the jurisdictions, and how can they kind of prevent and mitigate those folks being pushed out? And also, like I said, how other resources are distributed around the community. And so when I talk about reinvestment without displacement, that's thinking about, are there neighborhoods that historically have not been getting resources? Jurisdictions are supposed to be thinking about how to get resources to those neighborhoods in ways that don't then price out lower income residents who currently live there, who may want to continue living there and just have better access to other types of resources. And yeah, as jurisdictions are putting together kind of the programs that that are in the database that I showed, they're supposed to be thinking about how each program may or may not further these fair housing goals. And yeah, kind of describe how they're doing that. They're supposed to, yeah, do an analysis of what needs to happen in order to further fair housing in their jurisdiction, and then come up with programs to respond to the needs that they've already found through an analysis.
Yeah, and remind me, HCD actually designates whether they are AFFH programs, right? I know the city sort of offers them of AFFH, right? Does HCD weigh in and say, yes, this is actually AFFH?
Yeah, so it's not required that HCD weighs in and says yes or no, but most of the time in a lot of the certification letters that I've read from HCD, or a lot of the you're not yet certified letters, HCD will flag, like, in order to become certified, you need to strengthen your AFFH programs, and here are some like thoughts about how you might do that. Or in certification letters, they'll say, these are the programs that we see as really essential to AFFH, and they'll kind of flag those programs. And that doesn't mean they're the only programs that AFFH, but they're the ones that HCE has thought, like, these seem really important based on your analysis and our analysis, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it.
Great, thank you. A great question in the Q&A box. What consequences are there when cities don't meet the goals in their housing element? And combine this with one other question, which was, what power do community members or advocates have if cities are not meeting their commitments?
Yeah. Do you want me to take this, Skylar?
It's up to you.
Sure. I could try to answer it, and then if I'm missing anything, feel free to chime in. So I just want to first clarify that cities are legally required under California law to adopt their housing elements and be certified by HCD. If it isn't certified, the city is considered out of compliance, and that carries some pretty big consequences. One is funding risks. Cities that aren't in compliance will lose certain state housing and infrastructure funds. Um, and those are also actually critical dollars for housing development planning and local projects. There's also builder's remedy. If a city doesn't have their housing element certified, developers can use this thing called builder's remedy, which you may have heard of. And it means housing projects with at least 20% affordable units can bypass local zoning restrictions. So in other words, cities lose control over whether a project fits with their own zoning. Um, and then even if a housing element is certified, cities can still fall short on actually meeting the goals that they've laid out. And I think maybe that was where the question was getting at. So like permitting enough affordable units or adopting the programs they've committed to. So while there isn't currently a direct financial penalty for failing to hit those numbers, there are sort of some consequences. And one of them is, we're trying to point this out on our site so that the advocates, developers, and even the state attorney general, they can sue the jurisdiction that doesn't follow through. And then the housing, if you use our tool that we've presented today, it really shines a light on that progress or a lack thereof, which hopefully will galvanize advocacy and some media attention and apply some real political pressure.
Thank you, Jordan. Skylar, anything to add on the question of consequences for cities or ways that community members or advocates can hold their cities accountable?
Yeah, I can add a tiny bit more just because this is more what my work has been focusing on recently. Now that most cities have certified housing elements, is that so the programs I showed earlier that we put the kind of date that first deliverable is due basically into the database, and part of the reason for that was one of the ways that we were really hoping that advocates could use the database to get involved was to kind of track, say, for example, in Concord, just because Lindsay is talking about Concord in the chat, if the AFH related rezoning program in Concord has a first initial deliverable due date of January of 2026. I knew at one point when the deliverable due date was. I don't now. So we're going to say it's January of 2026. Then advocates can go into the database, see that the first kind of deliverable checkpoint is January of 2026, and start thinking about, okay, that means the city council is probably starting to think about it now, and kind of have that lead time by seeing when the deadline is to get involved in city council meetings. And if there are concrete deliverables in the programs, in the actions, in the deliverables, then advocates have kind of a hook for, hey, you said that you would adopt an ordinance by January 2026. You have 3 months to do that. You better get it drafted right now because you got to get it through city council meetings, something like that. On the flip side, if say that first deliverable, that ordinance had been due January of 2025 and it's not done yet, then they're way overdue, and advocates can start using the fact that it's way overdue as a pressure point. If it's that far overdue, then through a lawsuit or through HCD, the city runs the risk of being decertified or kind of entering other settlements to try to make sure that they meet meet their program requirements, even if it's a little bit late. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Skylar. The next question is, have you all thought about integrating MTC TOC policy compliance or other statuses that cities might want to aim for in order to be more competitive for funding? Those abbreviations are Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Transit-Oriented Communities Policy. Is it possible to integrate more information about what jurisdictions have done / are required to do to achieve those certifications so others know what to aim for?
I'm trying to think, is the second part of that question tied to the first part, or is that about the certification of the housing elements itself?
I
Well,
believe tied to the first part. But...
okay. Yes, I mean, no, I hadn't really been thinking about that until today. Ella and I were actually in a meeting together when we were talking about TOC policies, and funding around that. And no, that wasn't really on the radar for the tool during this last build. But I'm happy to announce that we have started a process. And I should have said this at the very beginning. I want to give a shout out to Exegy, which is the company that helped build this tool. So I'm working currently with Exegy to do a large round of interviews with housing stakeholders across all sectors to really figure out what next steps we need to take with this tool and what direction we can go in and what's working, what's not, and how people use the tool. And so this is certainly something we can consider as we take those next steps.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, are unincorporated jurisdictions like North Richmond or Castro Valley incorporated in the tool, and how might those cities be reflected differently?
Yeah, they are every jurisdiction, so that includes unincorporated county areas, and they're listed. If you go to the city list or you just search by unincorporated, you'll see some of them pop up.
And another question related to the consequences for cities that don't meet their housing element. Could you provide any examples of cities being held accountable?
Skylar, do you have any?
Um, yeah, I mean, I have more kind of off the top of my head in Southern California, which I think is largely because that housing element cycle ended theoretically or started. Housing elements were due earlier than up here, but like San Bernardino was way behind on getting its housing element certified, and so there is there is a lawsuit against San Bernardino that involved both kind of advocacy organizations and HCD, and a settlement process outlining a plan for San Bernardino to come into compliance and develop a certified housing element. There are a few builders remedy jurisdictions in Southern California. I'm afraid if I start listing jurisdictions, I'm actually going to end up listing jurisdictions that people like threatened lawsuits, and it seemed like they were at risk of builders remedy, and then it didn't actually happen. So I am actually not going to do that in case I am getting my jurisdictions confused. But there's certainly at least a lot of attention on a few Southern California jurisdictions that I'm happier to list. Like Huntington Beach, I know gets a lot of attention for potential builder's remedy. I don't remember whether they've actually fallen into it. San Francisco gets a lot of threats about suits that could put it into builder's remedy, but it's not there yet. LA also gets a lot of threats, but it's not there yet. There have been fewer in terms of like jurisdictions not following specific programs and then having successful suits. But the kind of programmatic enforcement is a newer piece of the law that a lot of us on the advocacy side are still figuring out how to most effectively use.
Yeah, my colleague Ammo also put another example in the chat of Woodside, which tried to make itself a mountain lion sanctuary.
Yes,
Uh,
infamously.
Great. Curious, the next question is, how do you account for equity impacts beyond what's measurable in the tool? For example, lived experience of displacement.
yeah, that's a good point. The Housing Readiness Report unfortunately can't capture everything. So we tried to focus on quantitative indicators like rent burden and gentrification risk to really give that baseline picture. Obviously, those numbers don't replace lived experience of folks facing displacement or housing insecurity. So really, the Housing Readiness Report is meant as a starting off point, sort of a way to ground conversations in data that's quantifiable so that advocates and policymakers and even community members can then layer with their own knowledge and stories and push those out into the world, whether it's at city council meetings or hopefully, we can get the media to bite on more of these stories.
And for government staff who are interested in using this tool, are there any practical applications that you could share?
Yeah, I think the tool, because we have worked with government staff to see how this tool could be useful to them. And it really, at a basic level, it's easier to just benchmark your jurisdiction against peers and see what's working elsewhere. So really, we want folks working in cities and counties to look at the housing element programs in other cities and find models that are working. What can you borrow from other cities, or can you just reach out to the city and can you work together to develop a plan? As well as other things like tracking your progress towards your RENA goals is just an easy place to stop and see that really quickly without digging through multiple dashboards. I mean, the HCD's dashboard is great, but it can be a little unwieldy at times. And you can use the data to communicate with your council and commissions and community partners about where you're making progress and where you need to adjust course.
Um, yeah, this is mostly repeating something that Jordan said, but one of the other things that I was personally really excited about for the database was the possibility of cross jurisdictional collaboration on programs. And so, for example, if you're working for a small city trying to figure out how to do an inclusionary zoning ordinance and it feels really complicated, then you can poke around in the database and see if somebody had a deadline to get done with an inclusionary zoning ordinance a year ago and reach out to that city and see what they have to say or see if they have a sample ordinance or something like that. Or if somebody has a similar deadline to you, you can kind of collaborate around that. And I really, hope that people start to figure out how to use it that way.
Great. I think we have time for this final question. Is there a way for jurisdiction in the Bay Area to have its housing element information added to the housing element action database? It looks like there's a list of currently includes 84 of the 109 jurisdictions due to lack of available housing element at the time of the database compilation.
We are working on that. And it's kind of a matter of resources of the folks who originally put the database together. And that is very much in the goal to try to add all of the certified jurisdictions that are not yet there, and eventually all of the jurisdictions, period, once they're all certified.
Great.
And
Does that answer all of our questions?
that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're pretty close to ending on time. So first of all, thank you, Skylar. Thank you, Ella, and Wendy behind the scenes for making the Zoom work. And thank you all so much for attending today. It's great to see that so many people showed up to hear about this tool. I'm happy to continue conversations further on this tool, or if you want to be involved in helping us decide the direction of the tool can go in to next, please reach out to me. Personally, I'm going to put my email in the chat. But other than that, again, thank you so much for attending today, and please help us spread the word of the Housing Readiness Report and the great things we can get done with it. All right. Have an amazing day, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.